You've seen the shocking news from New York City. A CEO shot and killed on the streets of Midtown Manhattan in practically broad daylight.
Calmly approaches the CEO from behind, shoots at him 3 times. The pistol appears to jam during the shooting. The gunman fixes the jam and continues to fire.
I'm not here to rehash the news, but there's a few key takeaways from this that, to me, remind me why I'm glad I don't live in the U.S., why I believe you need a diversified plan, and why so much of the U.S. is headed in the wrong direction. The CEO of UnitedHealthcare, Brian Thompson, shot and killed on the streets of New York City. One of the most concerning things to me as I watch that coverage is something that I told you would happen for years now. Thousands of people taking to the internet to say they're glad the guy's dead, to take pleasure in it, to make jokes. Now, I understand a lot of people in the United States are frustrated. As someone who helps people leave the United States because they think their taxes are too high or they don't trust their government, we help people move to countries all over the world to get a better deal. I understand that in the U.S. you pay a lot of taxes and you don't get the stuff that people who live in Europe, for example, and pay just a little bit more get. Now, UnitedHealthcare is a legal company. To the extent they were doing anything wrong, it seems to me the U.S. is the most corrupt country in the world, not because the corruption is illegal, but because the corruption is very, very legal. And so for me, this reinforces the fact that the United States is not a country that you want to be in. There is legalized corruption. There is no reason to attack some of these smaller countries that we talk about in Latin America or Asia for being corrupt. If you think that healthcare shouldn't be provided by big companies that deny claims, well, that to me is proof that your country is corrupt. The fact that it costs billions of dollars to be elected president just recently, to me, more proof of legal corruption. So people are pushing back on a system where this guy was running a legal business. Now, obviously, there were some insinuations of whether it was their insider trading. We'll have to see how that all plays out. But very concerning for me, if you are a business person, if you are a CEO, if you're doing anything that people can be jealous of. I've been talking to Bitcoin people now that Bitcoin's at $100,000. That's front page news. There are going to be people who don't have theirs in an increasingly desperate country, in an increasingly desperate West, who are frustrated. And they're just going to come out swinging. Was Brian Thompson the guy responsible for claims being denied? Certainly the buck stops at the top. But the once elusive killer decided, hey, this is the guy that I'm going to shoot and kill to make a point. And a lot of people stood behind that. Now, I'm not a guy who is afraid. I've told you many times I had a gun in my face in Nicaragua, somehow pushed the guys away, took a phone, ran off. I've continued to travel the world to plenty of emerging countries since then. I live in countries that people might not think are as safe. In fact, I am en route to Colombia as we speak. But like Bitcoin, like UnitedHealthcare, like anything else that may be controversial, Nomad Capitalist is controversial. We recently saw in the UK, following a disclosure by Nigel Farage, who spoke at Nomad Capitalist Live, a left-leaning group picked up on that and created basically an advertisement for Nomad Capitalist.
So, if you're a wealthy economic migrant, how can Nomad, and by extension Nigel Farage, help you?
The fact that Nigel Farage came and said, if you have money, you should be able to get a second passport. You should be able to move to other countries. You should be able to take your money and your talents somewhere else and get in. I'm not trying to equate the two to each other, but I would imagine the people who say that because I've built a successful business, I should not have an easier time moving somewhere. Do those people like my business? Do they like what I stand for? And someone who perhaps feels like in a country like the United States, they once had it pretty easy and now life is harder, but not for people like me. Do you think that I could be somewhere and someone's going to take a shot at me? I don't know. And guess what? I'm sure Brian Thompson didn't think anyone was going to take a shot at him. So what you're seeing, of course, right now in the news is a lot of corporate security departments taking this seriously. A lot of them probably figured, hey, we're in a safe country. Who's going to take a shot at our guy? Brian Thompson literally did not have any security walking down the streets of Midtown Manhattan that day. So it's becoming taken more seriously. But quite frankly, there's a lot of folks in the world who are going to take the law into their own hands more. And so I'm going to tell you what I'm doing to protect myself from this, what I think you can do to protect yourself from this. Brian Thompson was not a well-known guy, but you could go on their website, find a picture of him, figure out where he was going, and that's why you're seeing other insurance companies scrubbing their websites from their staff. They don't want their staff to face retribution. And so I think if you do anything that's controversial, who knows what that could be? Whatever is out of vogue, could you be a target? Yeah, the odds are you won't be. But the odds are Brian Thompson wouldn't be also. And so for me, this makes the case for having some kind of home overseas. One reason for that is, now if you're an employee, that's obviously a lot harder. But if you're an entrepreneur or an investor, let's say you're known in your community. Well, maybe you're a bigger target there. But if you have a home somewhere else, could that be more safe? That doesn't as much work for me because I'm not known by that many people, but I'm known by somebody pretty much everywhere that I go. And so that's a little bit harder for me. But I'll tell you, if you have a business, we've had clients that we've had to help them figure out how to lower their taxes where they move overseas, but they've got a physical business like a factory in the US or in Canada or in Australia. And maybe if you run that factory, you are more well-known in the community. But if you move to Dubai or Panama or somewhere in Mexico or Eastern Europe or Malaysia, where I'm at and where we host Nomad Capitalist Live every year, probably nobody knows and probably nobody cares. And they probably just leave you alone as every other foreigner gets left alone. Doug Casey spoke at the last Nomad Capitalist Live. For all the problems that Argentina has, he says, from a financial level and on a personal safety level, they basically leave him alone. He's not one of us. He's a foreigner. Just let him be. Let him do what he wants to do. There could be some example of that for you. Now, I'm not saying you have to move overseas, but one thing we've advocated here over the years, have a second residence permit, meaning you can go and live in that place, and have a second passport. You can buy an apartment in the country of Turkey. They will give you a passport. Now, this is not a tax-friendly country per se, but it's a place you could go where I'm guessing the average Turk on the streets is not going to recognize you and your factory that you run in Kansas City or in Manchester or in Sydney. And so that's just one way to get the most permanent level of access to a country. Buy an apartment, get a passport. The passport, of course, is for life, but there's plenty of countries where you can get a residence permit. One place I've been talking about a lot recently is Oman. People know Dubai in the Middle East, but as Dubai becomes extremely international, yeah, you're going to meet people there. If you want to be totally left alone, I think Oman is the most welcoming country in the Middle East. Bahrain, Qatar, those are also good, but Oman, I think, the kindest people, the most open people. We filmed an episode of our luxury living series, Live Like a King. You'll be seeing that coming out in the coming month or two. And to me, that's a place where other people are successful. You have a pretty good job where, everyone has some level of wealth. There's not a lot of poverty. There's really no homeless issue. There's no trash issue. Everything's spotless. And I think people pretty much live and let live. There's a culture in that part of the world of privacy. Don't interfere. Let people be what they want. And you're going to see that in that episode of Live Like a King in Oman coming out in the near future. So make sure you watch that. But for me, that's the kind of place you could have. You could have other places that are far-flung. Mauritius, for example. Buy a villa in Mauritius, get a residence permit. I've been to Mauritius. I don't think anybody really cares. So you want to find a place like that where you can go, whether it's a war or whether it's just a war on you or your legal business where you're trying to do everything legal and ethical and you think there is some kind of a threat. Now, again, if you work as an employee of a company that's based entirely in the US, that may be harder to do. But if you run a business or if you have investments, then this is something that I think you want to do because I think it's pretty scary and it's pretty telling. The United States cannot keep people safe. You pay taxes for the privilege of this. They tell you your taxes pay for the roads and the bridges and the schools and the police and the firefighters. And yet how many, of course, school shootings in the U.S. do you have? How many mass shootings do you have? And now you have in the middle of Midtown Manhattan next to a major brand hotel, a guy just comes out and shoots you. They said, hey, it's pretty risky. They said any number of cops could be going by there. I think there's 40,000 police on the NYPD. Well, where were they that this could happen? And the guy just gets off. And for days, they're still looking for the guys. I understand we all make mistakes, but my goodness, you're paying a very high price and you're given a lot of propaganda for it. This is the place to be safe. Don't go to Colombia where I'm going right now because you're not going to be safe. I've been murdered just as few times in Colombia as I have been in the United States. And I think that, being somewhere where you're a little bit floating above can be beneficial. I'm not saying Colombia is the safest place to be. I understand it's a more statistically dangerous place than Dubai or Oman or a lot of other places in the world. And yet, I'm able to have a pretty safe life. Obviously, most people in New York have a pretty safe life as well. And yet, if you are, doing something in healthcare in the U.S. that people don't like because they're frustrated with the condition of healthcare, or they don't like what your company does, I don't think anyone in Colombia is going to care about that. Now, you can say there are incidents in other parts of the world. Certainly, yes, in Colombia, there has been violence. And if you look at the South American crime statistics, they are substantially getting better. Plenty of U.S. cities are more dangerous than plenty of Latin American cities these days. You can talk about cartel violence in Mexico, although I don't think any person who's working with Nomad Capitalist or any expat who goes to Mexico is living in the kind of places where that is a substantial risk. Mexico is going to be a focus at our next Nomad Capitalist Live, among other places. But yeah, you had a story in the Philippines. A YouTuber was taken from his home and basically killed, and they suggest dumped out at sea. And it's a pretty sad story. He did live in the most dangerous part of the Philippines. I think that's the key element when it comes to moving overseas, is you want to find the safest place to live. And I will put the safest place of pretty much anywhere in the world. I will put the safest neighborhood up against somewhere like New York City. I just will. So when we made our first ever Live Like a King in Bogota, Colombia, people asked, if it's so safe, if it's so great, why do you have security guards? Well, number one, we're walking around with a lot of camera equipment. Number two, sure, precaution is good, but I'll tell you what, do you know where else we have security guards? Nomad Capitalist Live, for the benefit of the former heads of state and CEOs of billion-dollar corporations. We had the CEO of AirAsia last year. We had the president of Estonia. We have more heads of state and top CEOs coming this year. But you know what? One of the things that I intensified after hearing this was I talked to my team and I said, we have to find security teams in every place that I go. Because I often do walk around where I live. I often live in city centers, and you'll see me walk into various places. I've met hundreds of people that way. And I think most cases that's fine. But we at least ought to be prepared. And that's not because I'm afraid of Bogota. That's because I'm concerned just in general. We bought an office somewhere once. We own a couple different offices around the world. Our team is largely remote. But we had a couple of offices. I thought they'd be good investments in places where we had larger numbers of the team. And now as we're going to kind of pull back from that strategy, the investment part was correct. But I said, hey, let's put some certain security measures in this office that people can't get into our office. We have to make sure that our data is safe. And what they told me, one of the places was, there's a lot of political parties in this building. No one's going to want to come and get your stuff. I said, I'm more concerned about some journalists from the New York Times coming and screwing with us than I am about somebody locally. And so you can do everything right. We are the goody two-shoes of the business. I try and live very ethically. We only do not only legal, but I think ethical things for our clientele. And yet if someone's out to get you, they're out to get you. People don't really care about the facts. People are pretty emotional. We all want to think we're logical, but a lot of people are emotional. It's a pretty emotional thing to say, whatever the motivation was for maybe you got denied healthcare, I'm going to go and shoot this CEO of the company dead. And yet, I think that those of us who are in business have to protect ourselves. And so one of the things that I am doing is, looking at more security. I'm not saying that'll always be the case, but it's something to keep in mind. I'm also talking less here about, every passport that I have. I will talk, as I'm working on some more residence permits and passports, I will talk about some of those when I get them. But there's certain things that I think could be a threat to my safety now or in the future, or that people don't need to know, or it's just a business issue. I share them with I share my passports and those different details with the various banks and stuff. It's not like nobody knows what it is. It's not like I'm hiding anything, but I don't feel the need to reveal it publicly. We don't talk as much about, individual banks here, because the banks don't like it and they send, nasty grams. But quite frankly, there's some privacy that I want there. And so one of the things that I've really been, working on myself, and I really felt this in Oman, is you talk to people keep their lives more private. Not too many Omani YouTubers. I mean, we were looking for them to have on Live Like a King. There aren't too many Omani influencers. I mean, people often keep to themselves in that part of the world. You've heard stories about some of these well-known, Eastern European billionaire businessmen who have a bunch of children. You've never heard about them. And to me, there's something pretty interesting about that. I'm not saying that, I think I'm still pretty open here. I tell you where I'm going and what I'm doing, and I've told you various passports that I've gotten. But there's this weird thought in the Western world, and it's very anti-freedom, that if you don't overshare, it must be because you're hiding something. And what I realize is the more successful you become as an entrepreneur, the more wealthy you become, whether you're an entrepreneur or an investor, the more people are gunning for you. My dad told me that when I was 8 years old. When you're on top, everyone's gunning for you. And certainly if you do something, again, that is not teddy bears and rainbows, but that some people may not agree with, you want to think that there's a threat. And I will tell you this, I feel a lot more safe outside of the United States, certainly outside of London, outside of a lot of Western countries with the lifestyle that I live, given what I'm doing. And so I think that a lesson for me from all this is what I was already thinking. I know plenty of very ethical people who do everything right. No one even knows where they are. And it's not because they're hiding anything. It's because they're concerned for their safety. Heck, they don't want people gossiping about them. I mean, if you run a business with the size team we've got 100 people, there's always gossip. Why do you want even that? So I think for me, it's a renewed focus on privacy. It's a renewed focus. We generally don't post these videos when I'm sitting in the location. And there was never a particular reason for that. By the way, we have had some very minor threats here at Nomad Capitalist. I'm in a hotel. Somebody knows who I am. They're following me around. Nothing that's been violent or anywhere close to it, but you never know. And so the bottom line is, if you have residence permits and you have passports in different places, then you have access to other places, particularly the fact, here's what a lot of people don't understand, you can't just go and live in any country you want for as long as you want. You have a tourist visa, it might be 15 days, 30 days, 90 days, that's generally it. And even the ones that are longer, they generally don't actually give you longer, like Mexico or the UK. You can't just go and spend 6 months there. But what if you've got a security threat where you live? What if something happens at your factory? Or what if what if they're picketing your factory? Or what if who knows what could happen? Do you have a place where you could go and you could stay longer than a tourist visa is good for? A residence permit allows you to stay there as long as you have to. And I want to be in a place where I'm safe. I want to be in a place where I'm not really that known. And again, I'm known to some extent everywhere. I've already kind of crossed that. But for you, I want a place where I can just kind of blend in and I can run my business. And by the way, that same residence permit could be a backup for a world war or a pandemic or God knows what happens next. There's a lot of black swan events coming. But this is something that I never thought about because I always figured, hey, if I'm doing the right thing, if I'm keeping things legal, who would want to come and shoot me in the foot and shoot me in the back? Well, this is a stark reminder. And I think this is another reason why I'm glad to have diversification. I think everyone who's successful, I've been saying for years, is going to be an increasing target. People are increasingly desperate. They don't necessarily think about who their targets are. And quite frankly, if you have a family, I think that there are reasons to say, you know what, let's just pick a place that maybe is a little bit boring, but it's tax friendly. We can keep more of our own money. We can give our kids a global experience. We can give our kids a better, more conservative culture. We can perhaps, go and help out another country. Go to Uruguay, go to Oman, go to Malaysia, go to places that are safer, where you blend in. Maybe you work towards a second passport if you're not going to get one to start. And so this is something that we help our clients do. Nomadcapitalist.com/apply is where you go. I think this is something that we focus on people who are successful. So we ask you to have $1 million in liquid assets, or we ask you to have a high six-figure salary to become a client. If you don't, come to Nomad Capitalist Live. It's our 4-day event. Both of those things are designed to help people get some of the knowledge that I've learned, living this global lifestyle for a long time. And I will just tell you, this tragedy in New York City that unfortunately many people are taking with great levity is a stain on the culture of the country that I left. And quite frankly, I'm glad to be out of that. And I think you should be too.